Where do people with low education work? If you're employed at a better company than me, I'll approve the marriage. The moment my future father-in-law, Richard, found out that I was a high school graduate, his attitude changed dramatically. He must have been incredibly proud of working for a company with a market capitalization of $130 million. Little did Richard know that his own words would soon come back to haunt him. As he wished, I took him to the company where I work, and his once confident demeanor quickly crumbled. My name is Daniel. Right now, I'm visiting my fiance's family to formally introduce myself. I heard you've been dating my daughter for almost 10 years. Don't you think that's a bit too long before considering marriage? Richard, my future father-in-law, looked at me with a cold, scrutinizing gaze. Just as my fiancé had warned me, Richard was a strict and serious man. Ever since his wife passed away in an accident, he had raised my fiancé on his own. It must have been an incredibly difficult journey. And it's only natural that he would be concerned about my character and income before allowing his daughter to marry me. From what I've heard, Richard is an elite employee at a major corporation. Compared to me, a mere high school graduate, he must be a highly disciplined and accomplished individual. You're right. Maybe we should have considered marriage sooner. Oh, but I wanted to wait until I could guarantee that I could make her happy. I work in the IT industry, and it took me a long time to gain enough knowledge and skills to feel confident in my career. Oh, so you're in IT as well? For a brief moment, Richard's stern expression seemed to soften. My company is in the IT sector, too. Maybe I misjudged you. The IT industry is tough. Yes, it really is. New technologies emerge constantly. Honestly, it's a struggle just to keep up. I know exactly what you mean. You can't just work hard. You have to stay sharp, constantly learning, even in your free time. I sacrificed a lot of personal time for my career, and I probably made my daughter feel lonely because of it. I've heard that you raised her all by yourself. I'm sure she understands and appreciates everything you've done for her. The tense atmosphere from earlier had completely disappeared. Perhaps the shared struggles of working in the same industry had allowed us to connect. It seemed like he was warming up to me and that I might actually earn his approval. By the way, Daniel, you must have graduated from a good university, right? No. I didn't go to university. What? Richard's previously relaxed expression stiffened instantly. His gaze now carried an unmistakable sense of disdain. You're a high school graduate? How do you expect to support my daughter? Veins bulged on his forehead as he shouted. I've encountered people like Richard before. Those who firmly believe in academic elitism. While education isn't everything, it's undeniably a form of status and can have a significant impact on lifetime earnings. So, in a way, I understood why he was angry. To him, trusting his precious daughter to a high school graduate must have seemed unthinkable. You said you work for an IT company, but I bet it's just some small, insignificant firm, isn't it? His tone was dripping with mockery. He was looking down on me. It was simply because I was a high school graduate. I can't let my daughter marry someone like you. Please leave immediately. I remained silent and listened to Richard's words. This wasn't the first time I had experienced something like this. It reminded me of an incident nearly 10 years ago. Back when I had been out of high school for about 3 years. This was a story from nearly 10 years ago. It was not something I like to talk about, but my family was poor. My father passed away when I was small and I was raised by only my mother. She couldn't afford to send me to university. And with her constantly battling illness, her income was barely enough to get by. I was barely surviving each day, so I could never bring myself to tell my frail mother that I wanted to go to university. Sigh. Another day of overtime, huh? After graduating high school, I found a job at a small local company near my home. The work was demanding, but the pay was low. As a fresh high school graduate, my tasks mostly consisted of organizing documents or preparing materials for meetings, nothing more than tedious, time-consuming work. Even a high school graduate should be able to handle filing. You should be grateful we're even letting you work here. I heard remarks like that almost every day. Honestly, it was painful. If it weren't for my sickly mother, I would have quit that job in a heartbeat. The salary was barely enough. I was never able to leave on time. Every day, I felt my mental and physical health deteriorating, drowning in a monotonous cycle of paperwork with no sense of fulfillment or enjoyment. And yet, I endured it for 3 long years, pushing myself to the limit, all because I wanted to make life a little easier for my mother. So when one day, out of nowhere, the company went under due to financial troubles, a part of me felt relieved. I was finally free from this miserable routine. That was my first thought. But what now? Being a high school graduate and unemployed. That's not a great situation, is it? There was no time to bask in the feeling of freedom. After all, I was just a high school graduate. Most companies weren't looking to hire someone like me. Even though my previous job was low-paying and dull, the fact that I had managed to secure a full-time position at all had been a stroke of luck. Starting tomorrow, I'll have to job hunt again, or rather, look for a new job from scratch. I wasn't looking forward to it. For the past 3 years since high school, all I had done was file paperwork. How many companies would be eager to hire a high school graduate whose only skill was organizing documents? Slumping my shoulders, I left the office for the last time. I needed to go home and tell my mother about the company's closure. The thought weighed heavily on me. I intended to head straight home, but for some reason, my feet wouldn't move. There you are. Just then, someone appeared in front of me. It was her. Her name was Emily. She was an employee at one of our client companies. Looking back, in that monotonous and exhausting job, the only thing I ever looked forward to was talking to Emily. We saw each other a few times a month for work-related matters. Since we were close in age, we had gone out for drinks together a few times. Emily? What are you doing here? You look exhausted. Emily was catching her breath, hands on her knees. Sweat glistened on her forehead, and the top button of her pantsuit was undone, probably to let in some air. She grabbed her collar, fanning herself before stepping closer to me. Hey, why don't we start a company together? Huh? A company? You mean you want me to join yours? No, not that. I mean, let's start our own business. Your company went under, right? I actually just quit my job too. For a moment, I couldn't process what she was saying. The company she worked for was fairly large. It was nothing like the small, struggling firm I had been at. Even though I, a high school graduate, might not have been in a position to judge, Emily was undeniably talented. She was bright, proactive, and constantly came up with creative ideas that turned into successes. If she had stayed at her job, her future would have been secure. She would never have to worry about money, and in a few years, she would likely have climbed the corporate ladder to a respectable position. Why? Wait, is this for my sake? Huh? Why would I quit my job just for you, Daniel? Well, yeah, I guess that wouldn't make sense. The idea that Emily had quit her job just to start a company with me was an embarrassing misunderstanding. My face felt hot. I had already planned to leave. The pay was good, but the company was full of older employees, and honestly, they were all pretty stubborn. Ah, yeah, I get what you mean. They probably stuck to outdated methods, making everything inefficient and honestly, kind of boring. Companies that fail to adapt to the times don't last long. The company I had worked for was a perfect example of that. They clung to old-fashioned methods, refusing to embrace new technology. They simply wouldn't use it. The document filing job I had been doing was a prime example. All of it could have been managed digitally. Instead, everything had to be printed, checked manually, and stamped with a seal. Honestly, it was a complete waste of time. The future is in IT. IT, huh? But I don't have any knowledge or skills in that field. What about you, Emily? Me? Nope. But I have a plan, so it'll work out. Baseless confidence. But to me, in that moment, it was dazzling. With no degree, no job, and feeling like I had hit rock bottom, Emily's proposal seemed like something I could throw myself into completely. Something worth clinging to. To put it simply, I wanted to take a chance on her. After all, I was already at my lowest, so if things didn't work out, nothing would really change anyway. I heard your company went under, so I came straight over after submitting my resignation to recruit you myself. Well, thanks, I guess. But why me? I'll say it again. I was just a high school graduate. I had spent 3 years in a company doing nothing but organizing documents and preparing presentation materials. Those weren't exactly impressive, marketable skills. I figured you'd be the only one willing to take a chance on my gamble. And besides, I see your value. My value? What do you mean? Your personality, Daniel. You're patient, hardworking, and serious. I've always thought that if I ever started my own business, you'd be the first person I'd invite. She extended her hand toward me. So, let's start this together. We're both starting from zero, but we'll figure it out somehow. If we failed, both of us would be out on the streets in a few years. But if we succeeded, we'd make more money than we ever dreamed of. Maybe I could finally give my mother a better life. All right. I'll take that bet, Emily. I grasped her small hand firmly. For a moment, she winced slightly. Maybe I had squeezed a little too hard. Then, from now on, let's support each other. She smiled as she spoke, and for a second, it felt like a marriage proposal. The first few years after we started the company were nothing but struggle. First and foremost, neither of us had any real knowledge or experience in IT. For the entire first year, we spent all our time studying and figuring things out as we went. We were lucky to make just enough money to keep the company afloat. When we received our first significant payout, it felt like all our struggles had finally paid off. Emily and I celebrated by bar hopping until morning. Of course, the next day, we were both completely drained and barely managed to get through work, but looking back, it's one of my fondest memories. But those tough yet exhilarating days started to fade around our third year in business. This is bad. Emily muttered as she stared at the monitor. The screen displayed a line graph of our company's performance. Looking at the data, it was clear. Our numbers had taken a sharp downturn over the past 2 months. Those bastards stole our idea. Emily sighed, rubbing her temples in frustration. She was talking about the large company we had been working with for about a year. At first, things had been going well. But a few months ago, the situation took a turn. That company had outright stolen our idea. We mentioned our launching project to them during a meeting with them accidentally. Both Emily and I were first-time business owners. Our inexperience, combined with our naive trust in industry partners, had led to our declining performance. It was our own fault in a way, but what they did was still unforgivable. I understood why Emily was so frustrated. I don't want to say we have no choice, but they have way more capital and staff than we do. Yeah, and they got our idea out to market before we could. Even if we complained now, nothing would change. In business, whoever gets an idea out first holds the advantage. We'll have to pivot to another idea. That's our only way to recover. Yeah, I know, but... Emily looked pale. She wasn't her usual energetic self, her face was clouded with worry. Is something wrong? Actually, my father told me that if our performance keeps declining, I should shut down the company and find a job elsewhere. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. Emily's father had provided the initial funding to start our business. In other words, Our company was built entirely on his investment. That meant she couldn't just ignore his demands. Even if we have ideas, we don't have the budget to execute them. Without money, there's nothing we can do, huh? Once again, it all came down to money. I had given up on university because of money. I had endured a soul-crushing job just to make ends meet. What are we going to do? It hurt to see Emily so defeated. For now, let's try crowdfunding to raise funds. Will that be enough? Maybe not, but I'll figure something out. Emily had been the one to pull me out of rock bottom. I was only here now because she had extended a hand to me when I had nothing. So this time, it was my turn to help her. From that day forward, my battle began. Though calling it a battle might be an exaggeration. Or rather, there wasn't much I could do. The only thing I was capable of was going around to friends, business contacts, and relatives, bowing my head and asking for help. We have an idea that can make money. Even a small investment would help. Would you consider funding us? If we can bring this idea to life, our company will survive. And then, I can finally give Emily and my mother the life they deserve. Day after day, whenever I had time, I went around bowing my head, asking for help. I didn't care how many times I had to bow. Because honestly, the only weapon I have is my not-so-great brain. At first, I was rejected coldly over and over. But little by little, as people started to understand my determination, some began to say they were willing to invest. I know how hard you're working for your mother, Daniel. If it's just a small amount, I'd be happy to invest. Hearing those words nearly brought me to tears. And finally, between crowdfunding and private investments, we secured the funds we needed. I'm sorry. I had no idea you were doing all of that behind the scenes, Daniel. I did it on my own, so you don't need to feel bad. But I guess it was worth the effort. Yeah. Thanks to you, we secured the funds we needed. Now we can hire more people. Emily clenched her fist with determination. This time, we'll do it right. I'm going to make sure this idea comes to life. She was smiling. How long had it been since I last saw her genuinely smile? Emily looked best when she was smiling. From there, everything moved quickly. Emily was always a talented person. Having our idea stolen had crushed her spirit recently, but securing enough funding seemed to have rekindled her drive. In fact, she was more determined than ever. Within a few months, we brought the idea to life and officially launched it. The business took off, and our company's growth skyrocketed. Now I don't have to quit the company anymore. That's great. But Emily, are you sure you're okay staying as a regular employee? You're the co-founder, so you could take a higher position. No way. I don't need titles like manager or director. I just want to enjoy my work. Emily was able to stay with the company. The business expanded, and by the following year, we were opening branch offices. But Emily insisted on remaining a regular employee. She dumped all the tedious executive work on me, happily staying busy with the projects she enjoyed. I liked seeing her that way. This was a story from a few years ago. Now, our company has grown significantly, with multiple branches across the country. Things have finally settled down, and naturally, the thought of marriage started crossing my mind. I'm home. Emily walked in. Richard clicked his tongue in disapproval, a deep frown on his face. Huh? Why does it feel so tense in here? What happened? What happened? You've been dating a high school graduate? Well, yeah, he is a high school graduate, but I don't need your excuses. Stay out of this. Ignoring Emily, Richard turned back to me. I work at Bright Sky Corporation, a company with a market capitalization of $130 million. And where exactly do you work? His condescending tone was impossible to miss. To be honest, it didn't feel great. But I understood his perspective. He had raised his daughter alone and wanted her to marry someone worthy. That was only natural. I work at, let me guess, some insignificant company? Richard didn't even try to hear me out. With a sneer, he tapped his fingers on the table. If you work somewhere better than me, then I'll allow the marriage. I see. Well, I actually have some business at the office today. Would you like to come with me? What? What are you talking about? I think it'll be easier if you see it for yourself. That sounds great. I think that's the fastest way. Let's go check out Daniel's workplace, Dad. I bet you'll be surprised. Well, if you insist. With Emily's encouragement, we all headed to my company. It's been a while since I've been here. I've been doing a lot of field work lately. As Emily looked up at the towering office building, she spoke. Hey, who said I wanted to go to my own company? This is my headquarters. The place we arrived at was one of the largest corporate buildings in the country, not far from Emily's home. I told you to take me to your company. This is my company. What? With a bewildered Richard in tow, I stepped through the entrance. A secretary, who had been waiting at the reception, approached us. The president, Mr. Carter, we've been expecting you. Her gaze was fixed on me. What? Wait, what is this? Richard's face turned visibly pale. It was clear, he had no idea. Dad, the company you work for is one of our branch offices. Daniel is the president of the main headquarters. What did you just say? You mean, the company you founded is? Yeah. Bright Sky Corporation. I'm just a regular employee, though. She downplayed it, but without Emily, this company would never have grown so big. There was no way I could have built a $130 million company on my own. You really didn't know I was the president, did you? Maybe I should make more public appearances. Ugh, don't do that. It's just a hassle to be famous. She brushed it off, but the fact that Richard, a full-time employee, didn't even recognize his own company's president was a bit concerning. Sure, he worked at a branch, but he was still part of our corporation. And he wasn't just a contractor or a temp worker, he was a full-time employee. It probably wasn't ideal that a full-time employee like him didn't even know who was running the company. I had no idea. I've been so disrespectful to you, Mr. Carter. I deeply apologize. His arrogant attitude from earlier had completely vanished. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he bowed deeply. Please, raise your head. I wouldn't be here today without Emily's help. I told Richard the whole story, how Emily and I started this company and built it from the ground up. Without her father's initial funding, we never could have made it this far. For that, I was truly grateful. Even if Richard had once looked down on me for being a high school graduate. Still, I've shown unforgivable disrespect to you, Mr. Carter. Really, it's fine. It's true that I'm just a high school graduate. No, the truth is, my own parents didn't have much education either. We were poor, and I grew up struggling. Richard's voice softened as he began to speak. His parents had never managed to secure full-time jobs, scraping by on temporary day labor. There was never enough money in the house, and hunger was a constant companion. Tired of living like that, Richard took out student loans and put himself through university. That's where he met Emily's mother, got married, and eventually, Emily was born. After Emily was born, he became even more dedicated to his work. He wanted a higher-paying job. He wanted to make sure Emily never had to struggle financially. I raised Emily on my own. I didn't want her to go through the same hardships I did, so I was strict about who she could marry. Education isn't everything. Of course, education was important. Higher education opened doors to bigger companies and better opportunities. I knew that better than anyone. After all, I had been rejected from countless jobs just because I was a high school graduate. I understood the harsh reality of it all. But still, there was something I had to say to Richard. Being less educated doesn't automatically mean being unhappy. There are plenty of people like me, high school graduates who still live fulfilling lives. Though, I doubt many have been as lucky as I have. Everything I have, every bit of my success, is thanks to Emily. I see. Maybe you're right. Richard wiped the sweat from his brow and let out a deep sigh. My childhood was poor, but now that I think back on it, maybe I wasn't actually unhappy. His expression looked more at peace than before. Dad. I guess I convinced myself I was miserable. But in reality, I wasn't. Mr. Carter. No, Daniel. You helped me realize that. Richard called me Daniel. It meant he was no longer speaking to me as a president and an employee, but as Emily's boyfriend and her father. Once again, please allow me to marry Emily. I bowed deeply. If he was willing to speak to me as Emily's father, then I had to show him my sincerity as her future husband. I may still be young, but as you can see, I've built a company of this size. I promise I will never let Emily suffer. I know. You can raise your head now. Richard placed a firm hand on my shoulder. I looked up. Emily had stepped to my side. Richard glanced between the two of us, then smiled. Tears shimmered in his eyes. Take care of my daughter. That's all I ask. Then 1 year later, Emily and I got married and started living together. We had taken the long way around, gone through countless struggles. But now, I was happy. Emily was by my side, and my frail mother was finally able to live comfortably. In just a few months, we would be welcoming a child into our family. Thank you. Huh? What's that for? Emily laughed as she cradled her growing belly. I just felt like saying it. Did I do something to deserve a thank you? Who knows? Maybe not. That was a lie. I had always been grateful to Emily. For scouting me when I was lost after my company collapsed. For her ideas that helped our business take off. From the moment we met until now, I had always been grateful to her. Forget about that. We need to start getting ready. My dad and your mom are coming over, remember? Oh, right. I'd better put some effort into tonight's meal. Tonight, we were having a family dinner. Emily, me, my mother, her father, and the little one growing inside her. I had a feeling my life would always be filled with joy. As I watched Emily smiling, I was certain of it.